Brazil
políticos
has
mais
arrived at
corruptos,
such a
a
moment, she goes on.
democracia
The
fica
court
em perigo.
censored other political
A
speech from
corte
business
também
leaders,
está
elected members of
censurando
Congress,
a
and news and
liberdade
entertainment
política de
platforms on the right. This has
parlamentares
been carried
dizerem
out with assistance from
aquilo que
Electoral
pensam
Tribunal's Special
e
Advisory
se
to
transformaram
combat
com
disinformation.
tribunal
acts
de
as a
combate à
ministry of truth,
desinformação,
so-called.
especialmente o TSE.
In January of 2023,
No dia 23
the
de
New York
janeiro,
Times reported, referring
mesmo
to Brazilian
o
Supreme Court Justice
jornal New York
Alexandre
Times
Moraes, quote, using a broad
falou sobre
interpretation of the
Alexandre
court's
de
powers,
Moraes
he has
em
pushed
relação
to
aos
investigate
poderes
and
que a corte
prosecute,
está
as well as to
exercendo
silence
para
on social media
silenciar
anyone who
nas mídias sociais
he
qualquer
deems a
pessoa
menace to
que ele
Brazil's
considere
institutions.
perigo para as
He has jailed
instituições
people
brasileiras.
without
Ele
trial
colocou
for
pessoas na
posting
cadeia
threats
sem
on social media,
julgamento
helped
por colocar
sentence a sitting congressman to
perigos,
nearly 9
ameaças,
years in
como ele
prison
diz,
for
às
threatening the
pessoas do
court,
Brasil e a sua
ordered raids
democracia.
on businessmen with
Ele
little evidence of
está
wrongdoing,
declarando,
suspended an elected
decretando
governor from his
pessoas,
job, and
suspendendo pessoas
unilaterally
dos
blocked
seus
dozens of
cargos
accounts and
eletivos
thousands of posts on
e
social media with
caçando,
virtually no
perseguindo
transparency or room for appeal. In the hunt for
pessoas
justice
sem
after the
nenhuma
riot
forma
this month, he
de
went on, or
apelação
the New York Times
possível.
went on,
O jornal
he
New
has
York
become
Times disse
further
que ele se
emboldened. He
transformou
orders
em uma
his orders
pessoa
to ban prominent
que agora
voices
está com
online
muita força
have
para banir as
proliferated, close
vozes
quote.
online.
That's the New York Times. Many
Essas
Brazilians have
são
maintained that
características
concerns regarding these
informações
issues
do
have
New
become
York Times.
much more
Os
serious
brasileiros
since
estão
January
numa situação
2023,
muito mais
and that
difícil
such
agora,
violations have gravely
desde
undermined
23 de
democracy,
janeiro, que estão
freedom, and the rule of law
erodindo
in Brazil.
a democracia
As
e
chairman of the Global Human
da
Rights
lei no
Committee, I
Brasil.
am committed
Como
to supporting internationally
presidente
recognized human rights
da
in Brazil
Comissão
and
de
to conducting
Direitos
oversight on the
Humanos,
response of the U.S. government
nós
to these
vamos
violations.
responder como
I
o
will chair
governo
a hearing
americano a
on human
essas
rights abuse
violações.
in my subcommittee in the coming weeks.
Nós teremos
What I
uma
see in
audiência
Brazil
pública nas
today,
próximas
above all,
semanas, mas eu vejo acima
in
de
the
tudo no Brasil
investigations of
hoje,
the
nas
Supreme Court Justice
investigações do
Moraes,
trabalho
is called
da
rule by
Suprema
law,
Corte, especialmente
the
Alexandre de
opposite of
Moraes.
rule of
O
law.
que ele está fazendo
Rule
é
of law is
tudo
supposed to put aside
contra
law
ao
outside of
direito
politics,
e à
so that the
lei.
same laws apply equally
As
to all
mesmas
people.
leis não se
Rule
aplicam
by law, in
igualmente a todas
contrast,
as
means that while
pessoas.
some forms and procedures of law are
Ele tem
maintained, the law is
implementado
used
formas
selectively
e
as an instrument of political power.
implementando leis
There is
e
vast evidence
que
that this is
perseguem
exactly what is
pessoas
going on in Brazil today,
específicas. Isso é o que
where
está acontecendo no
investigations,
Brasil
inquiries,
hoje.
media
Nossas
bans,
investigações
content
estão
removal orders are
contemplando
used to single out the
remoções de
opposition to
pessoas
President Lula.
da oposição,
I am preparing
especialmente ao presidente
legislation that will
Lula.
address these issues.
Nossas
We will call it the
legislações
Brazil
vão começar a
Democracy,
trabalhar
Freedom and
sobre esse
Human Rights Act,
assunto
and I hope to
e
be introducing it very
esperamos
shortly.
que
We will
essas
hear
leis
now
sejam
from
passadas aqui nos
Brazilians,
Estados
including
Unidos
elected
agora. Agora
officials,
vamos ouvir de
that I believe their
vários
position and responsibilities
brasileiros
as
que
elected
estão aqui
officials
hoje,
make them a truly
especialmente os
valuable
parlamentares,
source of insight into the
porque
situation in
eles
Brazil.
têm uma
They're uniquely
informação
qualified to
ou várias
present the
informações
concerns
específicas de
of
quem
the
está
people
vivendo
of
toda
Brazil.
essa perseguição no
And
Brasil.
we will be joined, I believe, by Congressman
Eu,
Ronnie Jackson as well, who has
eu
expressed he's a rear
aqui
admiral for
estou
25 years
está me
of naval
acompanhando
service, a
o
member of Congress from the great state of Texas. He's in
congressista
total
Ronnie
solidarity
Jackson,
with what we're
do
doing
Texas,
today, and he should be coming along.
e ele
He's
vai
not here yet,
chegar aqui
but I
daqui a
would like
pouco.
to
Mas eu
introduce
gostaria de
Eduardo
apresentar
Bolsonaro, a member of the Chamber of Deputies
Eduardo
of Brazil,
Bolsonaro,
for any comments that he might have.
dos parlamentares congressistas brasileiros.
First of all, thank you, Chris, to give us this opportunity.
Primeiro,
We're very
muito
honored,
obrigado
and we want to bring here some light for
estar
what is
aqui.
going on in Brazil. My name is
É
Eduardo
muita
Bolsonaro.
honra para
I'm the
nós
most
estar aqui
voted
para
ever
dizer o que
congressman in
está
the history of Brazil,
acontecendo no Brasil.
also
Eu sou
son of President Bolsonaro and
o
former
congressista mais
chairman of the
votado do
41st
Brasil.
and National Defense Committee. I have always warned in my speeches in the Congress about the dangers of my country turning into a Cuba or
No
Venezuela
Congresso
with their
brasileiro
concentration camps.
sobre o perigo de
Today,
o nosso
unfortunately,
parlamento se
I
transformar, o
live
nosso país
in
se
my own
transformar na
movie about
Venezuela. E hoje
the Gulag. And for those who
nós
think I'm
estamos aqui para
exaggerating,
mostrar
I will
para o
cite
mundo o que
here
está acontecendo
few
no
simple
Brasil.
names.
Nós,
Philip Martins,
eu tenho
the international
alguns
advisor
nomes
to
para
President
apresentar.
Bolsonaro,
Felipe Martins,
as Jared
dos
Kushner
assessores
was to President
internacionais
Trump.
do
A brilliant
Bolsonaro,
young
como
man in
Jared
his
Kushner 30s
with a
foi pro
promising
Trump,
future,
homem,
imprisoned
jovem,
by an exceptional
aprisionado,
tribunal,
jovem com
accused of
uma
a coup
carreira
d'etat
brilhante à
never
frente.
attempted or planned it. And without the hope of
Ele é
minimally
acusado de
fair
crime que ele
treatment,
nunca
as
cometeu.
due process
Não teve
and broad
nenhum
defense no longer
tratamento
exists in Brazil.
justo. Isso porque a
Coronel
justiça não
Câmara,
existe
the
mais no
Bolsonaro
Brasil.
security
Coronel
detail,
Câmara,
who is now also in jail,
dos
accused
seguranças
of
do
imaginary
Bolsonaro,
coup d'etat.
acusado
And like
de
them,
golpe de
veterinarians,
Estado.
gospel singers, sign language
Veterinários,
interpreters, comedians as
intérpretes
Bismarck
de
Fugas,
Libras,
and even a homeless
e
and a
mesmo
person diagnosed
homem, sem
with a high
teto,
degree of autism, all of them
com alto grau
imprisoned,
de autismo,
accused
foi
of a
aprisionado
coup d'etat.
pelo
It's very clear
Alexandre
that
Moraes
all this
como
oppression and
golpista.
cruelty is
Toda essa
just a
opressão e
step towards the
crueldade
ultimate
é
goal
passo
to
a mais
imprison my
para
father, the president who dared
caminho, o
to
processo
put the
de
interests
investigar
of
e
Brazilians
aprisionar
first.
o meu pai.
My father is now persecuted
pai
and slandered in the most various ways. As
O meu
in
pai tem sido
every
perseguido de várias
tyranny,
formas.
the
Como
limits
em
of the
toda
ridiculous
tirania,
no longer exists.
a ideia
And he
de
even faces the
o regime
accusation
da
of
lei
having
não
committed
existe.
the
Ele não é
terrible
acusado
crime
de, ele é
of
acusado de
disturbing a whale.
ter
That's not a joke.
cometido crime
He's criminally charged
muito
for passing by a
cruel
whale on a jet ski.
de
And the most impressionant thing
perturbar uma baleia.
is the
E a coisa
complaint
mais impressionante
was made by Lula da Silva's environmental minister.
essa
This is more
acusação
ridiculous
veio da
than what
ministra do
Trump
Meio Ambiente do Lula.
charged, than what
E
Trump
isso tem
is
muito a
having
ver com o que o
as
Trump
charged
está
here in the United States.
passando aqui nos Estados Unidos.
My father is also
Meu
accused
pai
of
também é
attempting
acusado
a coup
de
d'etat
tentar
when
o
he
golpe
was
de
no longer
Estado
president.
quando ele não
The
mais era
judiciary,
presidente.
appointed by the
O
Communist
judiciário
Party in power, want
designado
us to
pelo
believe that my
Partido
father
Comunista
waited
no
to leave
poder,
power,
disse
and
que meu pai
when he no
esperou
longer had the
até
armed forces under his
depois
command,
dele sair do
attempt
poder, quando ele
a
não tinha
coup
mais
d'etat
força,
with
para
elderly and
cometer
unarmed
crime
women,
de golpe,
all of
golpe
these
militar,
thousands of
golpe
kilometers
contra a
away
nação.
from Brazil, when my
Quando ele
father
estava
was in
milhares de
vacations in the
distância
United
do Brasil,
States.
quando meu pai estava
Going to the end.
nos Estados Unidos.
They want us to believe, Mr. Chris
Eles
Smith,
querem que nós
that women,
acreditemos
elderly ladies, and all kinds of ordinary
mulheres
citizens,
e todos os
unarmed,
tipos de
are a
cidadãos
danger to
sem
the rule
armas
of law.
eram
And those
perigo para o
violating
regime
the
da lei,
rights and fundamental guarantees
violando as
are
garantias
the saviors. Ladies and
dos
gentlemen,
cidadãos.
these
Cidadãos,
stories are not something that
essas
someone
histórias
told me.
não são coisas
We
que
are
alguém
living this right now,
Estamos vivendo
and
isso agora
with
no
not
Brasil.
even a single
sem
word from Biden
nenhuma
administration, State
palavra
Department,
da
or any
administração do
governmental
Biden ou
authority
do
from the
Secretaria
homeland
de
of democracy, the United States of America.
Secretaria de
The
Estado
dozen
dos Estados
colleagues
Unidos.
that are following me here
Os
also
colegas que
will
estão
talk
comigo hoje
about terrifying situations.
vão contar
Brazil,
sobre situações
unfortunately,
terríveis.
is not a
O
democracy
Brasil
anymore.
não é
Thank you.
uma democracia mais. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Guarani.
I'd like to now introduce Gustavo Geyer,
Eu
who's a member of
gostaria
the Council of Deputies.
Convidar Gustavo Geyer.
First, I'd like to thank the Congressman for giving us time and a
Muito
platform
obrigado.
to come here today and talk about what's happening in
Deputado.
Brazil.
Eu
This is
quero
something
vir
that we no
estou vindo aqui
longer
para
have
falar
in
sobre
our
o que está
nation.
acontecendo no
We
Brasil.
no longer have the privilege
Nós não
of
temos mais
saying
uma
the truth,
nação, nós não
saying
temos
what we
mais
think, and giving our
uma,
opinion.
o
So
direito
to start,
de
I'd
dizer o
like
que
to
nós
ask you a simple
pensamos e dar a
question.
nossa opinião.
Is
Começo com
Venezuela
uma
a democracy
questão.
or a dictatorship?
Hoje, a
I
minha
believe
pergunta
all
é,
of
a
you here
Venezuela
today
é
agree
uma
with me that
democracia ou
Venezuela
uma
is not a
ditadura?
democracy.
Todos
It's
nós
far from
sabemos
it.
que
It's
a
a
Venezuela não é
dictatorship.
mais uma
But then I have another
democracia,
question. Does
uma
Venezuela have a
ditadura.
Supreme Court?
A Venezuela tem
Does
uma
Venezuela
Corte
have
Suprema,
a
a
Ministry of
Venezuela
Education?
tem
Does
ministro da
Venezuela have
Educação, a
Congress?
Venezuela tem
Does Venezuela
Congresso,
have
a Venezuela tem
public ministry? No. Yes, they have. But
Ministério
they are no
Público, sim,
longer a
eles têm tudo
democracy.
isso, mas eles
Because
não
all these
são mais uma
institutions that are
democracia,
valuable
porque
for
todas as
democracy have been kidnapped
as
and are
instituições da
served as an
democracia
instrument of
estão
oppression.
servindo
They are
como
served
instrumento
only
de
as to
opressão
arrest and oppress people for their
para
opinions.
prender
And
e oprimir e
what we
perseguir
have today in
pessoas.
Brazil is
O que
exactly the
hoje nós
same
temos
thing.
no Brasil,
Our
basicamente é a
Supreme
mesma
Court
coisa.
in
Nossa
Brazil
Suprema
does
Corte
not
no
protect the
Brasil
Constitution
não
anymore.
protege
As a
mais
matter of
a
fact, they
democracia
are
e a
releasing drug
Constituição.
dealers,
Na
they're
verdade,
releasing
eles
criminal
estão
leaders of trafficking,
soltando
and they're
líderes
putting
de
in prison
tráfico e
congressmen,
colocando
simple people
na
for their
cadeia
opinions.
pessoas simples e
The reason why
cidadãos
the
comuns
leader of opposition is
pelo
not
crime
here
de
today,
opinião.
Carlos Jordi,
A pessoa, o líder do nosso partido, o líder da oposição do partido não está aqui porque ele teve o seu passaporte confiscado. Ele não pode deixar o seu país mais para dizer o que está acontecendo no Brasil. Muitos outros congressistas não estão aqui hoje porque eles tiveram seus passaportes retidos. Existe uma coisa chamada fishing expedition. Todos nós aqui sofremos isso. Tivemos a nossa casa invadidas pela polícia na decisão do Alexandre de Moraes, porque nós estamos falando a verdade por causa das nossas opiniões. No Brasil, a coisa mais séria que você pode dizer hoje é falar sobre a sua mente, dar a sua opinião. Mas se você matar pessoas, se você traficar drogas, você vai ser defendido. Então estamos aqui hoje usando essa plataforma que vocês nos deram para dizer ao mundo que o Brasil não é mais uma democracia. Isso pode acontecer no nosso país também. Preste atenção ao nosso país. Houve uma pesquisa no Brasil com 3.000 pessoas perguntando se eles acreditam viver numa democracia ou ditadura do judiciário. Acreditem ou não, metade das pessoas responderam que nós vivemos numa ditadura do judiciário. Metade da população do nosso país entende que o Brasil não é mais uma democracia. Mais da metade do Congresso acredita nisso também, entende isso. E estão com medo de dizer. E o princípio que a razão que estão com medo é que eles não querem entregar de volta entregar o poder de volta ao Congresso. Intimidação. Recebemos ligações telefônicas dos ministros da Suprema Corte ameaçando os congressistas se eles não fizerem o que a Suprema Corte quer que eles façam. Então, como estou aqui representando o líder da oposição no Brasil, representando Daniel Silveira, um congressista preso e muitos outros, Carla Zambelli, que não pôde estar aqui porque seu passaporte foi confiscado. Isso não pode continuar a acontecer.
I would like you to take a look at the faces of all my friends who are here today. These brave men and women. These people now are at risk of the moment we set foot back in Brazil. We can be arrested, we can suffer search and seizure, we can have our lives destroyed. Why? Because of corruption? Because we steal public money? No. Because we're fighting for real democracy. Because we don't want to see Brazil becoming a Venezuela if that's not too late. So I would like to thank every congressman and congresswoman who are
a todos por representantes congressistas por terem a coragem de vir aqui e dizer a verdade ao mundo. Muito obrigado.
Thank you for the very, very powerful, as well as you, Eduardo, as well. Very, very powerful witness, and for standing up for the people of Brazil. You know, we stand in solidarity with the people of Brazil.
Pessoal da live, eu vou parar. Então, eu estou vendo muitos de vocês dizendo que está muito misturado. Eu vou parar a tradução. Depois eu explico para o Paulo, ok?
A member of the Chamber of Deputies.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you in the name of the Brazilian people for this opportunity we have here to speak up, to say what is going on in Brazil more freely than we can do in our own country, unfortunately. Thank you, America, for the long-standing relationship with Brazil. The United States of America is the largest democracy in the Americas. Brazil is the second largest, or used to be. We all know that democracy is an ongoing process, while freedom, as Ronald Reagan once said, is not passed on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. This is why we are here, to fight for our freedoms and to call to the world's attention the severe setbacks we are experiencing today in Brazil's democracy, freedom, and rule of law. When I first arrived in Washington, D.C. 15 years ago to study at Georgetown University, and I'm very proud of that, I looked at Latin America and saw how socialism was subverting countries that were once democracies. Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador. While those countries were succumbing to tyrants like Hugo Chavez and other puppets of Fidel Castro, and while their people were losing their freedoms, Brazil remained democratic despite the country's historical institutional flaws and endemic corruption. That was the year 2009. Throughout the decade of 2010, Brazil entered a new era in which I was very optimistic. We all were. It was a period of time when millions of concerned citizens took to the streets to protest widespread corruption pervading our country's leadership. Operation Car Wash brought these issues to justice and put dozens of businessmen, public servants, and politicians behind bars for money laundering and corruption, including the then former president Lula da Silva. He was found guilty as charged in 3 instances and sent to jail to serve a 9-year sentence. Not only in Brazil, by the way, but also Peru, Guatemala, and Panama had presidents convicted by corruption in their countries because of the investigations that started in Brazil involving transnational companies that also operated abroad. However, in the beginning of 2019, Operation Car Wash began investigating another branch of power in Brazil, the judiciary. Whistleblowers exposed bribing schemes in the justice system all the way to the Supreme Court. When the story was published in the media, all hell broke loose. The Supreme Court's president at the time, Dias Toffoli, an alleged participant in the bribing scheme, decided to censor Cruzoé magazine and opened an investigation accusing them of spreading fake news. Justice Toffoli appointed Justice Alexandre de Moraes to become the rapporteur judge of the case. The investigation, actually an inquisition, has the Supreme Court as an alleged victim, investigator, and judge at the same time. It is still open 5 years later and has been weaponized to persecute anyone whom the court itself understands to be criticizing it or opposing the views of its members. The number of people criminally prosecuted, or should I say more accurately, persecuted, by Justice Moraes and the court amount to thousands of Brazilians right now. Some of those here, some of those can't return to the country. From ordinary citizens to members of parliament, including the leader of the opposition, as just mentioned by my colleague Gustavo Geyer, journalists, opinion makers, and even judges. We have a judge right here that also asked for political asylum in the United States and is living here right now. From a homeless individual who was just absolved by Mr. Moraes after serving a lengthy prison sentence for being at the January 8th event by chance, to the former president of the Republic, Bolsonaro. Nobody escapes the rage and unconstitutional acts and decisions of the court. Assets frozen illegally, bank accounts secretly breached with no due process, passports taken, censorship, even torture. This is the case of Mr. Clériston Pereira da Cunha, known in Brazil as Clezão, who died in prison after spending 11 months in poor health conditions behind bars, including 2.5 months after an order for his release that was signed by the general prosecutor, but it was ignored by Mr. Alexandre de Moraes. On the other hand, the convictions of corrupt politicians are being annulled by the Supreme Court, as was the case of Lula, who was released from jail and allowed to campaign for the presidency again by a Supreme Court decision contrary to the ruling of the lower courts. Businesses that were fined for their bribing schemes are being absolved too, and the fines are being canceled by the same court. What we are experiencing in Brazil right now is a developing dictatorship. It is therefore not surprising that Lula da Silva's biggest allies are dictators, such as Venezuela's Maduro, China's Xi Jinping, and Russia's Vladimir Putin. Even the terrorist group Hamas sent congratulations to Lula as he returned to power, and is now congratulating Lula on his absurd remarks towards Jews and the state of Israel, comparing the legitimate defense acts of Israel to the Holocaust in Hitler's Germany, Different than other dictatorships, however, the one we are seeing in Brazil is built in a more subtle and dangerous way. The judicial system itself is leading the institutional rupture, which makes it more difficult for the world to understand this sad and dangerous process. People tend to trust judges more than they tend to trust politicians. In Brazil, however, trust in the Supreme Court has fallen dramatically. A recent poll by Atlas Intel shows that more than 50% of the population has lost completely the trust in the courts corroborating the feeling that the decisions of the Supreme Court are rather political than legal, constitutional, or just. I repeat, Mr. Congressman, our goal here is to make the situation well known to the world. We love our country. We love Brazil. We love the United States of America. We love freedom and we love democracy. And we understand that these virtues are only possible where there is strong rule of law. 15 years after living in the city of Washington, D.C. as a student, I look back to my own country, now as a member of Congress, with maybe a more realistic view, if not sad. This very opportunity that you give us, however, to share this message with you, with the American people, and with all the world, renews our optimism and hope. As much as we love America, none of us want to live in another country. We want to live in another Brazil. God bless America. God bless Brazil. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Marcel, thank you for that very eloquent defense of the people of Brazil and for speaking so boldly, as you all have, a message that needs to be heard by Congress, by the White House, by the State Department, and frankly, by the world. So thank you so very much for that. Paulo Figueiredo, an independent award-winning journalist who is, we have met and we've spoken, and I've learned so much from him. I want to thank him for being here. Paulo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. How's everyone doing? It's a beautiful, It's a beautiful day here in the capital and a historical day for Brazil. So I want to express my gratitude to Congressman Smith. You are a true champion of the human rights and a friend of the Brazilian people. So I would like to ask for a round of applause to Congressman Smith. He is unbelievable. He's unbelievable. He renews my faith in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as a living testament of Brazil's democracy crisis. Until 2022, I was the most watched political journalist in the country during prime time on cable TV. At that time, I also had 5 million followers across various social media platforms. Then, overnight, my social media was blocked in Brazil, my Brazilian passport was canceled, and my bank accounts were frozen by order of the Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes. 10 days later, under Lula da Silva, the Brazilian Department of Justice launched an investigation against the network I worked for, Jovem Pan, whom you all know, which then fired all the conservative commentators, including my colleagues, Marco Antonio Costa and Gerson Gomes, who are actually here in the audience today. The persecution recently escalated with a ridiculous claim that I had participated in a coup simply by accurately reporting on the behind-the-scene activities of the Brazilian armed forces. This is called reporting, journalism. The legacy media should try it sometime. I have been living in the United States for the better part of a decade, but now it's different. I live in exile, unable to return to my homeland. I wish I could say I'm the only one in this situation, but I'm not. Dozens of journalists are being persecuted, with several also exiled here in the US. I must mention the notable case of journalist Alan dos Santos, present here in the audience, whose arrest was ordered by Justice Moraes for crimes of opinion, and the extradition denied by the United States government. Or the case of the liberal podcaster Monarch, who I guess is also here today, having fled to America after his social media platforms were taken down and his life was ruined by Justice Moraes for merely questioning our electoral system and the ongoing censorship in Brazil. Tens of thousands of ordinary citizens had their social media taken down by the same Alexandre de Moraes. My friends, I assure you, these are all facts. And regardless of your political stance, you do not want to live in a country where one man can determine what can be said. That's why this violates all human rights and international treaties, even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees freedom of expression and of the press, regardless of frontiers. All this also violates my rights, protected under the Constitution of the United States of America, since all my journalist activity was conducted while living here, therefore under American jurisdiction and protected by the sacred First Amendment. Let me put it clearly. What's happening in Brazil is criminal. And unfortunately, this crime has accomplished interfered in the Brazilian election to guarantee the election of Lula da Silva. Even now, friends of George Soros and the Foro de São Paulo in the Democratic Party seek to silence our voices. And how did Lula da Silva repay all these good services provided by the Democrats? He has antagonized every single American interest globally, aligning Brazil with Hamas, Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, Iran, and of course, China. Under his leadership within the BRICS, Brazil has actively working with China towards ending the dollar's dominance as the international trade currency. This must end. I urge the United States Congress members to exert their oversight responsibilities to promote the American geopolitical interests and to restore the inalienable human rights given to all of us by our Creator. As this country's founding fathers so well described. This is what we ask for. God bless America. God bless Brazil.
Oh, thank you so very much. And thanks for reminding us of what Lula has done since taking office. I chair the China Commission. I've chaired 99 congressional hearings on human rights abuse by the People's Republic of China, by the Chinese Communist Party, and especially under Xi Jinping, where he is actually committing current day genocide against the Uyghurs. And then Lula, when asked, there's nothing but fawn over Xi Jinping. Ditto for Maduro, ditto for Cuba. And of course, it is very discouraging when the president of a country compares, not discouraging, it's outrageous, as you have pointed out, compares Israel and what they're doing against a terrorist attack by Hamas. And I would remind everyone to not just look at what they do, read what they say. The Hamas Charter of 1988 makes clear that they want every Jew dead. It couldn't be clearer. And they want the evisceration of Israel itself. And yet he compares, Lulu that is, compares what they're doing to defend themselves against Hamas to be equivalent to the Holocaust. That is outrageous. So thank you for reminding us of that. Our final speaker will be...
We are sorry as Brazilians to hear our president could say such absurd.
Andres Martinez Fernandez, who is Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America at the Heritage Foundation, and who will speak now. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. When I was approached by the congressman to engage on these issues, what we're seeing in Brazil, I was eager to accept because what we're observing is a very dangerous decline in the basic fundamentals of democracy and human rights in Brazil. And unfortunately, it's not getting attention. And I think the scope of this, obviously, we've heard, but the attendance that we have here from these prominent leaders in Brazil coming all the way here to highlight this challenge underlines the gravity of the situation in Brazil. So I thank all of you and Congressman for highlighting this issue. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the case of Brazil is a very dangerous but not new trend for Latin America and the world, in which we see the criminalization of dissent and opposition, the use of state power and judicial prosecutions to silence dissent and to empower a certain ideological or leading ruler, and that's what we've seen time and again throughout the region. And as some have pointed out, in Venezuela, it took that country down the path of crisis, and I worry that we are seeing a similar tendency in Brazil, and certainly what we're seeing, what we've heard from these speakers, aligns with that severity of this concern. And for those who think that this is going to be this kind of politicization of judicial activism is limited to just a few opposition voices, this is going to expand beyond that, and we're already seeing that with new actions going after independent NGOs, which are well respected in this city, including particularly Transparency International, which has been targeted by investigation in the Supreme Court for highlighting some of the abuses that they are seeing, some of the malpractice in the judicial system in Brazil. That has been rewarded with a special fishing expedition, as some have highlighted, in Brazil against that organization. So this is something that I hope we see more attention from the media and from outside of just the right of center bloc, because this is really an issue that addresses and impacts the broader freedom of speech and political rights in a country which is the largest, economically speaking, in Latin America, and has very, very significant implications for the United States. We've already heard some of the challenges that we've seen as far as the current leadership in Brazil not aligning with the United States, working in many instances at cross purposes with the United States and U.S. influence in the region. But despite that, we've really seen silence from the Biden administration. And if anything, a praise for the current government. We saw Secretary Blinken very recently down in Brazil praising the government for its actions on workers' rights and environmental rights, but no mention of the endangerment of political. A broader trend that we've seen with this administration, particularly in Latin America, of a deeply ideological focus and alignment for its foreign policy and its engagement in the region. So, I mean, you could be assured that if we were seeing a fraction of what we're seeing in Brazil, if we were seeing that in Argentina under President Milei or any other conservative government, the United States would have by now issued numerous statements and unleashed sanctions to respond. So this is a situation that merits response from the United States to ensure that we do not see Brazil go down a dangerous path that it's treading on currently. So I thank you once again to everyone for coming here and highlighting this, coming all the way from Brazil, and also to Congressman Smith for highlighting this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions from the press? I would ask, and I would appeal to you to really ask hard questions of the Lula government. There are people here who are putting themselves at risk. We will follow their return very carefully, and I can tell you that there will be no stone left unturned if any harm comes to any of these amazingly courageous men and women who have traveled here. It's just, sadly, Brazil is moving in the direction of anarchy, and the rule by law, as I said before, where they use, prosecutions against people with whom they disagree with as a way of just silencing the opposition. We saw it in Nicaragua most recently, when all of the presidential candidates were arrested. So Ortega had nobody running against him. We saw it when he arrested everybody in the church, including Bishop Alvarez, who has now been let go, but he's been exiled. So what I'm saying is that we are going to be following this very carefully, and it's not just me, and it will be bipartisan. And my hope is that the administration will join us. These men and women are men and women of courage and of great valor, and their words need to be heard. So please investigate, I say to the press. Thank you very much.
Can we, a gente pode tirar uma foto aqui geral?
Take a picture.